that we have this morning. Okay, unity, knowledge, and reputation. All three of these words are really important because these are things that you're going to see when you look at the Tower of Babel and the things that they actually had at this particular time. We're going to see how it is, though, that these things are used in a very bad way. They have unity, they had knowledge, and they wanted to have a good reputation or a good name, wanted to be known for certain things in the earth. So unity, knowledge, and reputation. When you go to Genesis chapter 11, where the story of the Tower of Babel is at, it's obviously in the book of Genesis, which means the book of the beginnings. And so Genesis does give us the account of where all these certain things came into being, such as man himself, but also the different nations and different languages. Most scholars, when they go through and they look at human language, they'll point it back to, at some point in time, having to be only one language, and then sprouting out into about 70 different languages, and from there, a few hundred different languages. But here in Genesis chapter 11, you see the beginning of that very process, and so it does give us the beginning of all things. It also needs to be understood, though, that the things in chapter 11 actually happened before some of the events in chapter 10. And this is, when you're going through the book of Genesis, is a very important thing. Many people will read the book of Genesis and they'll look at it as chapter 1 happened, then chapter 2 happened, then chapter 3 happened, and so on and so on. That is not how Genesis is written. At least a few times in the book of Genesis, you have something that happens, and then the next chapter will go back and tell you how that came to be. Chapters 10 and chapter 11 of Genesis is exactly that same way. So in Genesis chapter 10, notice verse 5. That from these coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to their language, according to their families, and according to their names. In verse 20 of that same chapter, these were the sons of Ham according to their families, their languages, their lands, and their nations. Also verse 31, these were the sons of Shem according to their families and their language and their lands according to their nations. And so what chapter 10 does is it tells us what happens during the time of, or after division happens. You had in chapter 9, Noah and his family get off the ark. And the command is given to them to go into all the earth, to spread out, to multiply, to increase upon the earth, to subdue it, the same way we had in Genesis earlier. But in chapter 10, you have that these divisions, where did they go? Where did Shem, Ham, and Japheth go? Where did they occupy? And what lands were there? Genesis 10 and verse 25 says this. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. And so Peleg, this one that's mentioned in verse 25, is in his time that the earth is divided. So how did that come to be? That's what chapter 11 is, and it gives us the account of when that takes place. And so what you also see in chapter 11 is that this is going to be the first attempt that you have recorded for us where the people of the earth are going to try to build for themselves a city. They're going to try to build a city. And that in and of itself is not an evil thing. Later in Numbers chapter 32 and verse 24 is one of the places of many places in the Bible where God actually commands the children of Israel, his people, to build a city and wants them to build cities. There's times where God wants them to build cities for specific purposes, like the cities of refuge, for example. And so God is going to have them build cities on many different occasions. And so one of the lessons that we can learn from the very beginning is you can do the right thing, but you can do it at the wrong time. And just because something is right does not mean it is the right time to be doing that thing. In this particular occasion, they're going to be trying to build for themselves a city, and God does not want them building them for themselves a city. He wants something else to be done, as he actually has given them commandment earlier. And so let's talk about and look at some of those good things that are gone bad. Genesis chapter 11, starting at verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Okay, so this is backing up before what chapter 10 had told us about. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, this is as they've been cast out from the garden, as the ark has settled, and as the people start spreading out from the ark to the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, Come, let us bake bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." And so one of the things that you see at the beginning is they said, "Let us do this thing." They were journeying together. And they arrived at this place together. And they said to one another, "We don't want to spread out. We don't want to be separated from one another. So let's build for ourselves a city." They had unity. Let us use the talents and the abilities they had. They had gained so much knowledge as well. But let us do this thing together. They had that kind of unity that's spoken of in Psalm 133 and verse 1 about how beautiful it is when brethren dwell together in unity. And as it is in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, when Paul talks about having the same mind and the same speech, when you have that same type of understanding with one another, that this is what these people had and that's what these people enjoyed. The problem is this, is that just because you have unity, if it is not unity based upon truth, if it's not unity based upon what God expects and wants from you, then that unity means nothing. You can be united in error. You can be united in something that looks very, very promising and has great consequences attached to it, but those consequences can be bad. We know in places like Genesis 9 and verse 1 that God had said this. They had unity, but God said this in Genesis 9 and verse 1, paraphrasing, spread out. As was read for us this morning, go into all the earth, subdue it, multiply upon the face of the earth, fill the earth. That's what God wanted. God wanted His earth, His creation, His place filled with people. He didn't want a city right then. He didn't want that unity that they had. He wanted the unity to be this, do as I have told you to do. What's interesting about this too is that most of the commentators place this at about 100 to 114 years after the ark had settled and they had left the ark. If that's the case, then Noah would have also been alive during this time period because he lived for about 350 years after the ark. What's also interesting about that is that in the span of about 100 to 114 years, you probably only had maybe 500 or so people upon the face of the earth at this time. It would seem very important for only that many people, after all the earth had been destroyed, that they would stick together for a time. God did not want that. God wanted them spreading out and filling all the earth. One thing that we also see is that these people had a mind to work. Let us take the skills, the abilities we have. At this time, they had already learned how to use asphalt, or something very similar to what we would consider asphalt. This land of Shinar that they were in was at the meeting of two rivers. There wasn't much stone in this area, but what was there was a lot of the residue and silt that was coming off of the meeting of these two rivers. And so using these things, some of them being very black in color, they would be able to use those and bind them things together like what we refer to as asphalt today. And they had already learned how to use these things in such a fashion. In Nehemiah 4 and verse 6, you see that the reason that the temple was built so quickly, in just a span of just over 50 days, was because the people had a mind to work. Building what they were proposing to build was going to take a lot of effort. And as I said a moment ago, they didn't have a tremendously huge amount of people even at this time. And yet they had a mind to get this thing done and to get this thing done together. The problem is this. Psalm 127 verse 1 tells us that unless the Lord is the one who builds the house, you're building it in vain. Unless the Lord is the one who guards the city, then the watchman stays awake in vain. Because it has to be God who is watching over it, God who is the builder. God never proposed this building. And because of that, even though they had a mind to work, it was not going to be successful. As I referred to a moment ago, they also had knowledge of how to use these resources that were available to them. They knew how to make a city and to make a large structure. We're going to look at some examples of what this structure may have actually looked like. And when you consider building such a tower as they were proposing to build, that you would have to continually make this and expand this wider and wider and wider in order for the top of it to actually be secure enough to do what it is that they wanted to do. And this wasn't just going to be a building, but it was also going to be a city. They had some engineering minds at work during that time period. In Romans 1, and we looked at this a little bit in our class this morning, let's go back together to Romans chapter 1 and notice a few things. Romans chapter 1, starting at verse 20. You remember that Paul is talking about how it is that the Gentile nations actually had an avalanche of ungodliness and how they steeped themselves and unrighteousness by gradually moving further and further away from God. In Romans 1, verse 20, since the creation of the world, his, speaking of God's invisible attributes, are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Imagine yourself being about 100 years away from the flood that destroyed the entire earth, when people are living hundreds of years. But you're only about 100 or so years away from the flood. Do you think you would understand God's power and his might? But in verse 21, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. The Tower of Babel is just one of countless examples of what that exactly looks like. God said that this is what I want, spread out to all the earth to do it. They thought it'd be better, be wiser for us to stick together, stay in one place, use the ingenuity that we have, and build for ourselves a city. This was not a city for God. This was a city for themselves. This was not one that was going to fill the earth with the glory of God, but one rather that was going to increase their reputation and their name. In verse 30 of Romans chapter 1, verse 30 says that they were backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. Notice how many of those things could be said about not only the Tower of Babel, but also our society today. Haters of God. God says one thing, you do another. That means you hate the Lord. Haters of God. Proud. Look what we have done. Let us build for ourselves this city. Boasters. Let us make a name for ourselves. Inventors of evil things. This tower built to the heavens itself. Inventors of evil things. Over and over again, you can see that how using something even like unity, a mind to work, having good understanding and knowledge, that those are things and those are virtuous traits that Satan is able to use for his purposes instead of the Lord's. And so they wanted a name, and they wanted a name for themselves. A good name is to be desired. Proverbs 22 and verse 1. It's something that's very, very valuable. But in Proverbs 6 and verse 17, when it gives us that list of those things which the Lord hates, a proud look is at the very beginning of that. So which is it? Having a good name or that being a proud look? For these people, the problem was this, is that the name that they were making was not a name that exalted the Lord. It was a name that would exalt themselves. And that's something that the Lord himself actually hates. In Psalm 10, the 10th Psalm, is a very telling idea of what happens when you have a proud countenance and you think that your way of doing things is better than God's. Because the proud, in Psalm 10 verse 4, the wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts. And so when they sat down to propose to build for themselves this city, it appears that God was in none of their thoughts. Notice in those 4 verses, just those 4 verses of Genesis chapter 11, how many times they said, come, let us build for ourselves. We don't want to be scattered. We want to have unity. We know how to do this thing. We can make the bricks and we can bind it together. We can build something to the heavens itself. And this was something they proposed and started to go through upon building. Some believe that this may be called something called a ziggurat. Here's an example of one, and these are scattered throughout Mesopotamia, which is this area of Shinar that they had built in this plain. There's about a dozen or so of these that are actually over there. Some are in very much disrepair. Some of them are like this one where it's almost like just mountainous itself. But what many of them would be is this idea of having almost like a pyramid, but it would have stairs that would ascend in the front and maybe even in the back, and on the sides. It would have a dome on the front. It would have a place upon the top in which many times they would worship. Now, the word tower is used when it talks about the Tower of Babel. Some of these did actually have towers that were built upon them, and they would reach very, very high, even into the heavens or the sky. What's interesting about that word tower, though, is it comes from a Hebrew word migdal, which is translated pulpit in Nehemiah 8 and verse 4. And so when people would talk about these ziggurats, some of them would say that what would happen is you'd have a place built up high upon the top of it where worship would be offered. Now, that would either be something where you're offering your worship there and it's to your God, or it would be that your God is being called down to that place to receive worship. It's interesting if that is what's going on during this time period, because what God says about this ziggurat, and here's one of the ones that's in is that this high place that's built there, if it is a place where your God is called down to receive worship, verse 5 says that God does come down, and it's not to receive worship. And so these things that were built were monumental, and they were high places. Often in the ancient times, when you read through the scriptures, you will see that these high places were places that people said that since we're closer to the heavens, that it makes worship that much better. But notice what God says about these places in Isaiah chapter 2 and others. And as we go through this, one of the things I want you to keep in mind is that this place, Babel, in the valley of Shinar, is Babylon. This becomes the place that is known for idolatrous worship throughout the rest of the scriptures. In the Old Testament and also even in the New, and even as it goes to Rome itself being called Babylon in the book of Revelation. And so these high places, these idolatrous places of worship, are going to stick with them. Notice what God says about these high places. Isaiah chapter 2, starting at verse 12. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall come upon everything proud and lofty, upon everything lifted up, and it shall be brought low, upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan, upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower, and upon every fortified wall, upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all the beautiful slopes. The loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be brought low. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. Daniel 4 and verse 30. And again, Daniel is speaking from Babylon. And speaking of Babylon, in Daniel 4 and verse 30, when the king spoke, saying this in Daniel 4 verse 30, is this not great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? And then you remember what happens in that chapter? That very night, he becomes like a wild animal. He is brought low, and he is subdued quickly, even after he was even saying the things about his great city of Babylon. And so this place of Babel becomes later day Babylon that we know. So Genesis chapter 11, verses 5 through 9. One of the things it says, starting at verse 5, Genesis chapter 11, verse 5. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. They built a place where maybe their God would be said to come down, and the Lord did come down. But notice that he said, let us come down. Let us come down and see what they're doing. God did not come down to receive worship because God was in none of their thoughts. God came down to see what it was that they were proposing to do. God came down in the sense that he answered to Job. When Job and his friends had all these questions about why is this hardship and difficulty coming upon us? And God tells Job, now you stand there like a man, let me ask you a few questions. When I created the world, where were you? When I made all these creatures, did I consult with you? Do you have the ability to say to the winds and the waves to go this further and no further than this? Do you have that ability? Now you stand there like a man and you answer me. That's what God came down there to do. God came down there to see what it was that they were doing, to visit what was happening, to let man know, look, this is what I have proposed to do. Your plans are not going to foil my will. This is what I told you to do. You're either going to do that because you have decided to obey, or you're going to do it because you're going to be forced to do it. Now, which is it going to be? And that to us ought to be a lesson that is very difficult, but one that we should learn very early on as a Christian. Don't wait until you're forced into a position before you finally make a decision on what right and wrong is. Do it when God tells you. When God says that this is what I want, that immediately becomes what is right, and everything else is wrong. That's the point of our class on sin. There is a specific mark, not a general target area. There's a specific mark. And when God says this is the way that it's to be, that's the way it's to be. And anything else, no matter who it is, no matter how much unity we may have behind it, no matter how much ability and strength and knowledge we have behind it, does not matter. If this is what God has said, that is it. It settles the discussion. And so it was with Job, and so it was to be with these people as well. In Proverbs 16 and verse 18, the Proverbs speaks so much about the pride and the arrogance and the plans of men. In Proverbs 16 and verse 18, it says, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. In the ESV, it says that this is only the beginning of what they will to do. What I believe that is happening here is that God had not long before this destroyed the entire world with a flood, because every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was evil continually. They had completely departed from God's ways. This tower was only the beginning. Somebody say, well, it's only a city. Look how united they are. It's not that they're sacrificing babies or anything on this idol, on this altar or this tower yet. There's nothing suggested that they're planning on worshiping some other god other than our God from this. So what's really the harm of building this thing when they have so much unity and they have a mind to work and they have knowledge? This is the problem. God commanded something different. And when you start to depart, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, when you start to depart from what God has said, this is only the beginning of what you will do. The person who is faithful in what is least, will also be faithful in what's much. But if you're unfaithful in what is the least of things, you will also be unfaithful in what is much. And so we can never look upon anything that God has said as being insignificant or small or not a big deal. It's all, as Brother Gary was talking about this morning, missing the mark. And so God said, come, let us. Man had said, come, let us do this. Come, let us do this. Gather with me and let us be one person and let us do all these things together. Then God looks upon deity and says, come, let us. So who is going to win in such a struggle, in such a battle? So God says, come, let us go down and foil this thing that they're proposing to do, because God's will is going to be done. God was going to fill the earth. In Genesis chapters 6 through 9, we see that he destroyed all those who dwelt upon the face of the earth except for Noah and his family. Could God do such a thing again with something else? Absolutely. So this thing that they had proposed to do, to build this tower, to stay in one place, this is only the beginning of what they will do. So let us go down and accomplish the will that I want done. And this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to send calamity. And these various tongues are given to them to where they cannot speak one another's language, and they have to scatter upon all the face of the earth. So what are a few lessons that we can learn? One thing that's interesting about this is the way in which God decided to cause the world to be spun into chaos, having one language, and then making from that one language many. It's interesting that in Acts chapter 2, the very same concept is used in reverse. That there are all these different languages to where people cannot understand one another. But if I could make everybody make one language and understand one language or one tongue, or to be able to speak in a language that you're able to hear in your own native tongue, then I can unite the world. That to me is a very cool thing. And maybe that's why God chose it, because he said, back here I'm going to confuse them, but in the future, let me think what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to unite people through this. Brother, we don't all speak the same native tongue or native language, but we know how important communication is, to be able to speak a common language. The common language of brethren, the common language of unity, the common language of knowledge, the common language of work. Brethren, the Bible tells us that's the language of love, that we're united with that perfect, bond of unity that I'm going to take the time to understand. And brethren, if there is one thing that is so very needed in our day and time, it's understanding. Everybody's about trying to force their own view, their own opinion about things. Or people saying, come, let us. No, come, let us with God. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Isaiah 1, about verse 18, where it says, come, let us reason together. That is not you and I. That is not me and you. That is God saying to his creation, come, let us reason together. It doesn't matter if I unify with you. It doesn't matter if we have the same opinion. It doesn't matter what we agree upon. If we don't both agree with God, that means nothing. And it's empty and vain. One language. And that's what God used there in Acts chapter 2. Everyone being able to hear the gospel. Also, from Acts chapter 2, and even earlier in Mark chapter 16 and verse 15, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. God intends for us to spread out, to fill the earth, as taking the language from Genesis chapter 1, to subdue it. How do we subdue the world today? It's not through force. It's not through coercion. It's not through building some monumental city and name for ourselves. It's about taking the simple gospel. In Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 4, you see how the brethren stayed in Jerusalem because they had all things in common. What a beautiful time in the Lord's church. And we've pointed out many times how wonderful it was that the brethren were willing to sell their lands, and nothing that they owned they considered belonging to themselves, but they brought the things that they sold and they brought it to the apostles' feet so that everyone in the Lord's body could have equality with one another and have the same type of money and have all these wonderful things together. And that was not what God intended. Was it beautiful that they had the sentiment? Yes. Was it what they were supposed to be doing? No. They were supposed to be spreading out. So in Acts chapter 8, you see what happens? Persecution arises against the Lord's church. And in Acts chapter 8, verse 4, it says that they went everywhere. They were scattered everywhere. Sounds a lot like the Tower of Babel. And everywhere they went preaching the gospel. Because what did God want? Did God want everybody staying in one place so everybody could have equality? No. He wanted people spreading out and preaching the gospel to every creature. How is God glorified? He's glorified by his name being carried out, by his purposes being carried out, by every soul being saved, not so that they could build for themselves a name and a reputation and a city in Jerusalem. It was never his intention. It was never stated as such. When you go back to Acts chapter 1, you see that he tells his apostles, you will be ambassadors for me. You will be those witnesses for me and all these other areas, not just Jerusalem. So spread out, as he had said. Let God be the one who determines for himself the city. In Genesis chapter 11, or Hebrews chapter 11, that great chapter of the heroes of faith. Hebrews chapter 11, and starting at verse 8, it says that Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out of the place which he would receive an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. Now when Abraham went out, it says in verse 9, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promises. This is why, because he was waiting for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. It's interesting that Genesis chapter 11 is followed by Genesis chapter 12. And in Genesis chapter 12, what do you have? You have Abraham being called. And Abraham goes out. Genesis chapter 11, you have people saying, let us stay in one place. Let us build for ourselves a city and make for ourselves this great and wonderful name. Chapter 12, God tells Abraham, you leave your land. You go into a land where you're going to be a stranger, the only one really. You dwell in tents, and I will make for you a name. I will give you a land of promise. And through you, all the nations of the world, of the earth, will be blessed. Through you, doing what I tell you to do, I will build for you a city. I will build for you a name. That's what we're always looking for. And that's why when we sing songs like, this earth, this world not being our home, it should ring so true to us because we're just sojourners and pilgrims. And it doesn't matter if there's only a few hundred of us that inhabit the entire earth. And we have to be scattered for whatever the reason may be. God's the one who's building the city. God's the one who's giving the name. And so we need to be humble and submit to that. John 14 and verse 6, Jesus said that I am the way, the truth, and the life. There's no one who comes to the Father except through me. I don't believe that when they were building the Tower of Babel, they believed that they were building it to heaven itself, but a heavenly direction. I believe that this was one of the things that was at least a precursor for some of the places of worship that were later used in Babylon. Whether that's what they were intending to at that particular time or not, I don't know. But I do know this. The only way to make it to heaven is through Jesus Christ. And so if we're going to have unity, let's have unity in Christ. If we're going to have a mind to work, let it be to do the work that Christ has given to us. If we're going to make a name for anyone, let it be a name for Jesus Christ. Let Him be the one who builds the city. Let Him be the one who exalts. There's no one who comes to the Father except through Him. So again, the Tower of Babel is such a wonderful lesson to study with our young people, because we instill that trust within them from an early age. Doesn't matter what land you go into. It doesn't matter where you're going to be found one day. It doesn't matter how smart people think they are. You stay with what God has told you to do, and you will be just fine. That's the lesson that they need to learn from that. When man tries to do it his way, God's going to step down, and He's going to confuse things. So do it because you've chosen to do right, not because you've been backed into a corner and you have no other alternative. That's the choice that's laid before. So the question I'm going to leave with you this morning is this, is whose glory are you seeking? I know that this audience is full of people who are seeking for God's glory, who want Him to be exalted above all the earth. There is no greater exaltation of what God's purposes were all about than when the heavens itself, as well as the earth, is able to rejoice because someone becomes a Christian. So if you need to be baptized this morning from the remission of your sins, or if you have sin in your life because of departing from God's ways and turning to your own, we can help you with whatever that may be. So if you're subject this morning, please come as together we stand and sing.